When I was young, I loved stories about the Loch Ness Monster. I loved watching optimistic documentaries that described the monster. I liked looking at images of plesiosaurs in the water. For me, it inspired this deep sense of wonder. And as a young man, I was so excited for there to be a great revelation that the Loch Ness Monster was in fact real and that plesiosaurs still live to this day. And I realized that I needed to have that. I needed to have a sense of wonder about the world. Um, but unfortunately, as you may be thinking as you listen to this, the Loch Ness Monster isn't real. Probably. I'd like to leave that door open because why not? But it's most likely not real. And if it ever was real, I don't know, and I could never really say. But I still needed that sense of wonder to keep me going through life, I guess. It's easy, I think, as you become an adult to start to expect what the world is going to give you because you have enough life experience to kind of know. You can sort of lock yourself into a mindset where you know you're never really going to be surprised because you've had enough experiences to really set your expectations. But for me, that is a bit bad. It's a bit toxic for me because I need to have a sense of wonder. And that for me is where fiction comes in, that is where novels come in, and that's where fantasy specifically comes in. And that is why I am a fantasy author because it gives me that childlike sense of wonder that I once had when regarding plesiosaurs in the loch. Hello, my name is JC Trainer. I'm a writer. I've written a novel. I've finished it. It is done, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what to do with it now. But I'm thinking that I'm going to make another video to explain exactly what I'm going to do with it. So stay tuned. It seems to me that the real world has a deep sense of negation for wonder. And that simply doesn't exist in a fantasy book. In a fantasy book, if it seems like there's a ghost, there's probably a ghost. If it seems like there's a dragon flying overhead, there's probably a dragon flying overhead. It's not like Scooby-Doo, where, however impossibly, the store clerk didn't actually make a dragon out of like cardboard and somehow trick everyone into thinking it was a real dragon. Meanwhile, it was actually just the store clerk. No, in fantasy, it's a real dragon. And there's something kind of affirming about that, at least I feel. I feel like that finally grants you a license to have wonder in fantasy. And of course, this isn't just true of fantasy. This can also be true of other speculative fiction. Sci-fi can do this. Horror can do this in some ways. But specifically speculative fiction, but specifically fantasy, I think, gives you the greatest blank check because it's just a totally different world. And so my love of fantasy eventually grew into a love of writing fantasy, which was a bit of an adjustment, and I'll probably make another video about that as well. But as a writer, you get lost in a new world, and it's just so engaging and it's so interesting, and I recommend it extremely highly. Now, I guess we could deal with the idea that is childlike wonder even a good thing? Should you have that? Because I think sometimes it's viewed as childishness to want to have wonder about the world or about fiction, about anything. But I don't think it is childishness. I think childishness is immaturity and perhaps hoping the world is more interesting than it actually is. But I think it's healthy for adults to nurture a childlike wonder in some area of their life. Obviously, you're not going to have it in everything, but I think keeping that with you to give you some sort of animating spark, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So why do I love fantasy, and why do I think you should love fantasy? Let's dive into some bullet points that I have written below, which you can't see. Brandon Sanderson is one of the greatest fantasy authors living. He's great. I'm a big fan of his work. But he has a great quote, which I don't have pulled up, but I'm going to paraphrase because I heard it at one point in one of his YouTube videos that I watched. And basically, that fantasy is every other genre plus dragons. which is completely correct, right? That's the great thing about fantasy. Its defining characteristic is that you have a unique world. And so you can have a mystery in fantasy, you can have a romance in fantasy. In fact, that's one of the most popular genres of fantasy right now, romantasy. Fantasy is amazing because it is so versatile. So whether you're reading it, whether you're writing it, you really have a lot of room to stretch your legs creatively, right? And I just think that there's something good about escaping the cynicism of reality by keeping childlike wonder alive, and I think that can be done through fantasy. Now, I think one criticism of fantasy might be that it's an escape from reality, and it is, in my opinion. But I think the best fantasies will integrate the most meaningful parts of reality back into their stories. So, for instance, if you have a character that just has no feelings whatsoever, they're not afraid to die, they just want their one thing, and that's all they want to do is kill the dragon or whatever, and they have no feelings, it's not going to be that good of a story, and it's not going to be that good of a fantasy story. But really good and really compelling fantasy, which does exist, will integrate real problems into a fantasy world. So you're not necessarily escaping all the world, you're just escaping maybe the more boring elements of the world. A great example of this is in the Stormlight Archive, one of Brandon Sanderson, again, one of his works. He has a character that struggles with depression, right? And it's a fantasy world, so it's like, how does depression work in a fantasy world? And he does it masterfully. It's very interesting. The first 2 books of that series are so good. And it's interesting because you can relate to the character, and that's the greatest fantasy. It takes you away from the world you live in, but it brings back some of the most meaningful elements of the world that you live in. It's just great. Another interesting thing about fantasy is it reintegrates history, right? So I like history. I think history is very interesting, but for me, history is a bit depressing. Like a lot. Like it's very depressing. If you just like only read history, it gets very grim. And I think there is a place for that grimness. I think that, we shouldn't be escaping negative emotions all the time, but you don't want to live in that, right? Like if all you read about is World War I, oh my goodness, it's so heavy. It's so rough. It's tragic. There's some beautiful poetry that was written in World War I, but it doesn't negate the tragedy of it. And sometimes you just want to integrate some of the most interesting parts of history into another world. And that's what fantasy does a lot. It does a lot with medieval fantasy, other types of fantasy. There's like World War II fantasy, which is great. My book is kind of a World War I era-ish fantasy, which I'll be dropping a lot more information about that later. But I think fantasy is great because it can reintroduce you to history in a way that is, I don't want to say more engaging, but it's simpler, I guess. But I like that. And I'm not saying you should ever, read history. History is important. You should know it. But you don't want to live there. And this is my last point, is that fantasy cities are extremely cool. Maybe that's a nerdy take. I don't know. I think they're so cool. I love fantasy artwork of cities. They never make any sense, and I don't want them to make sense. I don't care that the spire is like a mile long and it goes up into the sky and they don't have air conditioning, so I don't know how they're making it like livable. But it's cool, and I like that. I love grandiose, ridiculous proportions. I think that's so fun. I think it's so interesting, and I love to think about it. It gives me a great escape from the sort of, I don't know, maybe dull city planning of the modern world, perhaps. So those are my reasons to why I love fantasy and why I think you should love fantasy. Just to close off, there's probably no real monsters except for us, if you want to define it that way. But you can still have wonder. As you read and as you write, you can still go to these other places and you can still live these other lives. And I think it's valuable, and I think it's good. It keeps me going, at least. I love doing it, and I'll keep doing it for as long as I live, honestly. So thank you for coming. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you all.